I'm Mangino. Welcome to the Mangino Talks podcast. We talk about everything that matters to Pittsburgh, from current events to Pittsburgh history, social issues to sports, politics to practical day-to-day life. And we're talking about social issues and really practical day-to-day life today because of the news that's out just this morning as we are recording this podcast on Wednesday, that there was another shooting at a school, this time at Pittsburgh's Oliver Citywide Academy. And yes, there was a shooting just a little over a year ago that occurred at the same location. This shooting that happened today resulted in one fatality. Police are saying that the suspect is apprehended and there's no longer a threat to the community at large or the school in particular. It happened all this morning with police being called out around 7:45 to this. Mayor Gainey already putting out a statement regarding the shooting, and he says in part that what we're dealing with is a culture that we have created and that we need to cultivate a new culture. Here's the quote. "We have cultivated a culture of violence and death, celebrated guns, and glorified shooting. We have failed as a country." And so questions come up. Is this really, in some respect, our own fault? Are we the victims in all of this? Not only, obviously, the person who was fatally shot today, the kids that go to Oliver, children that are concerned every single day as they go to school and they prepare themselves for the possibility of a school shooting. All victims? Of course. But is there something we can do about that? We're going to get to that, too. It's also, by the way, the anniversary of the shooting in Uvalde, Texas, at Robb Elementary, where 21 lives were lost in that mass shooting. And to help us talk about all of this is a guest that I have come to know and trust and depend on and greatly value his perspective in all of this. His name is Dr. Rueben Brock. He's a counselor, he's a consultant, speaker, author, assistant professor of psychology at PennWest University at Cal. And you can find him on Facebook at Dr. Rueben Brock and on Twitter at Rueben Brock. Dr. Brock, welcome to Mangino Talks.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you very much for making time. It is heartbreaking, isn't it, to hear yet of another shooting that takes place, and it's with children at a school setting where everyone would love to believe that children should be able to go and be safe and that parents would believe that they're safe and that their children are going to come back home to them. Your thoughts about the announcement this morning, the news of the shooting at Oliver?
Well, you're absolutely right that it's absolutely heartbreaking, and my immediate thought is that it's almost hard to believe that this has become so normal. As I listen to you talk about the intro and the number of these incidents that we've just heard about recently, it's scary to think that, another school shooting almost doesn't even rise to the level of shocking news anymore. It's really sad.
It is really sad. And speaking of what doesn't rise to the level of shocking news, how about this? According to the organization Gun Violence Archive, they report that in the U.S. this year alone, and we're only at May 24th, 230 mass shootings have occurred. And they define a mass shooting as having 4 or more people shot, not including the attacker. So the reality is, outside of Pittsburgh, the story of this shooting at Oliver won't make news, and many people will go on thinking, well, it's in the city or it's that particular school, and
right.
It's not me and not mine, and I'm going to go on with the rest of my day and not even think much about it. But the idea that it's this consistent, that it happens this often, it goes back to Mayor Ed Gainey's comment about a culture. Do you believe that it is a culture that we are dealing with today, that it is something that has been created by us collectively as a society?
No question. Mayor Gainey is right, and this is something I've actually been saying for years. I ran for office years ago. I think it was 2018. And one of the things that I spoke about regularly was the fact that we would need to change our culture around guns, because that's essentially the problem. It has become normal. So when you talk about culture, all you're saying is, what are our shared values? What are our shared norms? And so in America, it is considered normal to have a gun. It is considered normal to carry a gun. It's considered normal to have guns around you, which is okay. No problem there. The problem is, it has also become normal to hear about someone taking one of those guns to a place that we all consider safe places and shooting everyone around them. And because we haven't made enough of a fuss about that, that has become a part of our normal culture. And that is very, very problematic.
Let's talk about the culture amongst young men seemingly all over the country, cities everywhere, that when there's a dispute, that it's ultimately settled with a firearm now. I remember way back when I was in school, if there was a dispute that was big enough, then there was a fist fight that took place outside in front of the school or something, or just off school property. Right. And then that occurred, and so oftentimes there were friendships that were created afterwards. Sometimes not, but sometimes yes. But it didn't resort to the idea of, I've got to annihilate you. I have to eliminate you from existence. What brought about that in your mind, that young people resort to this so oftentimes?
Well, I think there are a lot of factors that are going into that, but you're right. What was the norm back then was, we kind of duke it out, and the thought of someone needing to die, literally not be here tomorrow, that wouldn't have crossed most people's minds. And you really only heard about that in the most extreme of environments. But now, what you have is a situation where lots of folks have started to feel like the kind of current discourse in America has reached such a pitch where their life is in danger anytime there's a disagreement, and people really feel like they are protecting their rights, which is why a lot of times you'll hear some of these mass shooters, when you look at kind of their ideology and their belief system, it's all about, their rights, and it's kind of like, you can't trample on my rights, so I'm taking out everyone who might want to do that, or anything that kind of threatens my, my freedom. And they always have these kind of convoluted ways of seeing it. And I think the problem with that is that we now many people value freedom more than they value life, right? So in other words, the argument about, yes, but we have to have the right to do this, that supersedes the fact that people are dying because we see this right in the way that we are currently seeing it. In a healthy society, we weigh these things and recognize young people dying is not part of the deal for me, so we're going to have to pull back. And that is just that's not what the current thinking in America is. And I think that's the problem, is we don't value each other enough anymore.
And how did we get to here, in your estimation? What brought us to the point to where we don't value each other and we don't have this ability to argue, dispute, and in so many cases just not feel the need to kill each other over it? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think for me, the number one driver that I look at and see is, problematic. And when I don't want to go so far as to say this is the problem. What I see, though, is that our culture gravitating far more toward social media type exchanges rather than, personal kind of real life connections with humans. As more and more of our connections become superficial, then our connection to each other becomes more superficial. Oh. And so we don't value each other in the same way, because because we don't interact with each other in the same way. So, if the only time I ever see my neighbor is on Facebook, well, then I just care less about how he's doing. Whereas when we used to sit on each other's porches and talk all the time, I get to know a side of his life or her life that you don't really see on social media. So then you build concern and care because I know when your wife was sick, or I saw that your son got hurt and I care about how he's doing. Those are the kinds of things that make us have compassion for each other. And when our interactions are so superficial, it's really easy to write each other off. I don't care about you because all I know about you is the stuff you kind of flashed on social media. And it's just a very one-sided way to see your world. And I think because we are gravitating more toward that superficial view of each other, it's just really easy to see, or to believe, I think I'll hate everybody that's going to be in that club over there when you go shoot up a club, or when you shoot up a school. I hate all these kids at this school because no one cares about me. But the fact of the matter is, oftentimes we are not connected to each other enough to know whether or not, we actually care about each other. I think that's part of the problem, is we just don't have the same connection that would have been present, 30 years ago.
And with that social media disconnect, if you will, for that superficial contact that you just referenced, my guess is that COVID magnified that if we were going in this trajectory in the first place, there was this exponential spike that occurred as a result of COVID. Is that fair to say?
It is completely fair to say. I mean, many people were accustomed to socializing on social media, but their kind of daily work life required that they go to the office. And now there are tons and tons of people who don't actually see real people on most days because they don't need to. And so, yes, I think it absolutely created this exponential growth feature with respect to the superficial nature of our relationships. I mean, today I can order a pizza, and if I choose to, never see a human being. I can make a note on my account, have him leave the pizza on the stoop in front of my door. I can wait till the driver leaves to open my door. I don't have to see a human anymore.
And you can do that with everything. All of your
That's
shopping,
exactly right.
all of your groceries, everything. You can live a hermit life completely disconnected. What a sad state for a society that is built on its abilities to have social interactions. You can't have a real functioning society without that aspect. It's also interesting to note that today, on the 24th, there was a story at CBS regarding mass shootings because of the anniversary of the shooting in Uvalde and the toll that is taking on Americans and their mental health, and especially the issue with young people. Because young people are more and more into social media than even we as adults happen to be, it is easily their existence and the news of these things, these events taking place, these anniversaries and all, it's a perpetual bombardment. When we think about what we went through when we were in school, and I realize I'm a bit older than you, but our concern was, you go through the duck and cover, and I was at the tail end of that, and the idea that maybe there was a nuclear war, but nobody ever thought it was real. I mean, it may be, I guess, but for these young kids today in school, they've grown up and they've never known a time in school where they haven't had to worry about it and prepare for it. And on top of that, Doc, they see it on a regular basis, if not daily, that yes, these things do occur in schools, and it's likely, or at least it could happen in their school too.
That's right. I remember, I will never forget this because it was such a powerful experience. I'm back in my childhood. It's the mid 80s. And one of my friends, my neighbor, she became really kind of freaked out about the thought of a nuclear war because, there were news stories about, the whole America and Russia and what will happen. And I remember she was kind of really messed up for a couple of days. But I remember thinking, wow, that is such a wild thought that she got so wrapped up in that concern, because it just didn't feel like a real concern for most of us. But today, it would actually be completely normal and rational for a teenager, a 12-year-old, to be completely, kind of beside themselves with fear about going to school, because the chances of a school shooting are very, very real. And we've now seen them in every setting. I mean, I have a toddler that goes to a private church-based preschool, but there have been shootings in those situations. And so there is literally nowhere that you could logically say you are safe from it.
And a concern that I think all of us should have is that even if your child never experiences this with a shooting at their school, the idea of the perpetual exposure is not only going to have an impact today, but it could play a role decades down the road. Let me give you a quote here from Dr. Rihanna Elsie Anderson and get your thoughts about this. She says that a child's brain relative to an adult is that when you're experiencing, witnessing, and being exposed to the traumatic event, that actually can reshape the way that your brain grows, functions, and operates. Would you agree with this? And if you do, are we talking about something that could have lifelong impacts?
Yes. So let me say, there's really no, whether you agree or disagree. That's fact. That it's called plasticity of the brain. The brain responds to what it's given, and it will rewire itself when necessary. And when there is a traumatic or extremely impactful event, you really don't have many choices. Your brain, particularly because a child won't have the ability to really understand what's going on, the brain will find a way to reconfigure so that it can handle the information that it's given. And yes, if you are not careful, if you are not seeking out professional help to manage it, it will have literal lifelong implications.
There's also a concern, too, that some of the ways that we're looking at addressing the issue of shootings in schools and violence may be making it physically safer, but not recognizing the true importance of a child's psychological mental health. That if you're going to put up, according to one specialist, if you're going to go ahead and put up visible security measures like metal detectors, there needs to be an accompanying building effort to build a positive climate and explanations for why these things are in place. If not, the children will then just draw their own conclusions, and it may not be the ones that are the healthiest for them. Your thoughts there?
Again, completely agree, because you have to recognize and understand, when you put a metal detector in front of the door, a person that sees it will have to decide why they believe you put it there. And if you don't tell them anything, what a child will naturally do is fill in the blanks with the worst possible scenarios. And so next thing you know, you're going to have fourth graders running around thinking, I clearly live in a war zone, because what would be the other reason for needing metal detectors? What's the other reason there needs to be an armed guard at my school, other than that there are people that are trying to get me? That is just the most logical thought, because it is the simplest thought. That's the thought that most young people are going to come to. And so if you don't make an effort to tell them otherwise, that's the narrative they're going to use.
One of the things that I want to do in this podcast is give people reasons for hope. I also want to empower people. So oftentimes we think that, all right, government is the answer. We need to have a law for this or a law for that, or take away a law, or what. Maybe it's a big institution. They'll fix the problem. But I'm a genuine believer that all of these things come down to us. I don't want to be the victim and be powerless in facing whatever it is that we may be dealing with, like today with school shootings. I want us to feel as though there's something that we can actively do about it. So when it comes to that, On the issue of trying to help our children, our grandchildren, nieces and nephews, how would you advise that we help them cope with the anxieties that come from violence at school, whether it's gun violence or just school bullying or whatever it may be at school?
Honestly, what I would say is make sure you're talking to the young person. Give them that opportunity to ask questions, because that's where you're going to find out whether or not they're understanding what's going on around them. When you talk to a young person and ask, how do you feel about this? If you start to hear some disturbing kind of thoughts, that's how you know that they're not processing this well. And so the first line of defense is always going to be communication. Let's talk about it. How do you feel about what you saw the other day or what you read on the news? Do you feel safe in your school? These are the kinds of questions that I want to hear happening at the dinner table, because it opens up the line of communication so that the young person can say to you, yes, this scares me, or, well, I actually heard a boy at school saying something a little weird yesterday. That's the only way we combat this, is talk. We've got to be really open with each other, particularly open with our young people. We don't want to scare them, but you got to give them an opportunity to say whatever's on their mind so that you can make sure you're helping guide them to find the healthiest way to see the world around them.
One of the concerns that I have personally is I want to reassure, but then at the same time, I don't want to invalidate the feelings.
Yes.
How do you do that? Is that a difficult needle to thread?
Well, no, because understand, you validating their concerns is just that. You can say, no, it makes perfect sense that you feel that way. I understand. I hear you. I get it. Tell me more about how you're feeling. That's validating. And on the other hand, you can also be honest and say, we are going to do everything we can to protect you. And, Daddy will always be here to watch over you, because there is a manner of speaking in which that is true. And those words are comforting. And so, I tell my 3-year-old, you don't have to worry when Daddy's around, because I mean that I'm going to do anything in my power to help you. Understanding that if a person with an AK-47 pulls out of the bushes, we are in trouble. But I have no control over that anyway.
Right. Is it productive to admit your own concerns to your young ones?
Yes, it is, because it allows them to see that, one, their feelings are normal, and two, that you are human, right? Those are both very important pieces that you can give to a child simply by saying, listen, it scares me too. Right? Because that is a very, very healthy, a very, very human response. And so when they hear you say that, they understand, oh, this is okay for me to feel. Mm-hmm. And so, the other side of it, the concern is, well, a young person's going to say, well, wait a minute, if he's scared, then who's in charge here? Who's protecting us? So you have to be able to, that's the needle that I would want to thread, is managing. I want to show my children mm-hmm. that their fear is well-founded and normal, and also that I'm confident that I can protect them and that we can be okay, and that we will make good choices so that we are in as safe a situation as possible.
Any advice on what we can help our children say to other children? Because the peer conversations are going to happen a whole lot more than the child to the adult conversations. So for those that would take the step to want to encourage their kids and advise them, how would you handle that? How would you recommend we best handle advising them in that situation?
Yeah, what I would say is always be paying attention, always listen whenever you hear things that your peers are saying. And if you hear something concerning, you must, in any given situation that causes you some concern, if there's a weird feeling in your stomach, tell an adult. Let the adult figure out how to handle it. Mm-hmm. What I would want them to say is, you are not qualified to make the decision about whether or not this is something you take to the principal or the teacher. Let an adult that you trust make that decision.
That's good. whether it's children just being concerned, generally speaking, or a specific issue that may arise. Because you have to wonder to what extent do you have these violent episodes that occur, like the shooting that took place. To what extent did other students know and felt as though they didn't have the empowerment to go and say something to somebody, and those words could have made a difference in somebody's life today.
Exactly. And what we have found is that often, not always, but often when there is one of these situations happens, there are a handful of young people who knew it was likely to happen.
Wow.
And so when that is the case, you have to ask yourself, what would have empowered that other young person to speak up? And the fact is, they need to know that it would be okay for them to do that.
Dr. Rueben Brock joining us. He's a counselor, consultant, speaker, author, assistant professor of psychology at PennWest University. And you can find him on Facebook and on Twitter. Facebook, it's Dr. Rueben Brock. Twitter, it's Rueben Brock. Doctor, thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for listening to the Mangino Talks podcast. New episodes drop Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. For more on me and the show, be sure to visit manginotalks.com. Follow me on your favorite social media platform by using @ManginoTalks, or you can just Google Mangino Talks. And once you find me, please like, follow, subscribe, and share the pages with your friends and family. And thanks again for listening to the Mangino Talks podcast.